Let me get up. All right. Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, I was off screen, doing some logistical work. I didn't realize that we had push play, but we're live. Welcome. Appreciate everybody for stopping by. I have the round 6 game 2 between Magnus Carlsen and Etienne Bacrot. And as always, for my people in the Philippines, I would say mabuhay, magandang umaga, magandang apon, magandang araw. Whenever you watch this particular video, maraming salamat po sa nanonood ng aking my video, aking mga kaibigan. Appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. Anybody who is coming from Norway, I will say God Morgan to you, tusen tak. Appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. Anybody that is coming from France, I will say bonjour. Comment ça va? Comment allez-vous? Ça me fait plaisir de te voir, mes amis. Appreciate you guys very much for stopping by, taking a look at my stuff. Bon appetit déjeuner, all that good stuff. If you guys are ready to go, let's take a look and see what we have for this game. So we have e4, c5, knight to f3, d6, and we have bishop to b5. So this, as you guys know, is the Sicilian defense, and it is called the Canal attack. Like I always say, it kind of looks like this is like a little canal going to the king. So that's probably why they called it that. And so we have bishop to d7. Bishop takes d7, queen takes d7, and then there's c4. And as you guys are probably familiar, this is the Maroxy type of bind. Usually when you have a c4, e4 situation coming up, knight to c3, and then, at some point probably a d4. This is a bind just to try to prevent d5 from coming. So we have e5, knight comes to c3, and at the same time for black, they're kind of doing their own little Maroxy type of bind because they do not want d4 to come. So as you guys can see, d5 is literally impossible, and so is d4. Both sides have done what they've set out to do. Knight comes to c6. We have bishop to d3. And now we have f5. And f5 is the novelty of the game. Now, in general, you want to be very careful pushing your f-pawn, on the white or black side. Because it is a very weak diagonal if you open it up. It literally depends on the situation. In this particular situation, it's okay because the knight has already developed, so it's kind of blocking the queen. Plus, you can push g6 if you want to, just to block. But there are some positions that become open where you want to be very careful pushing your f-pawn because you can be subject to attacks and pins and things. It can get pretty dangerous for you. Also, too, they're really in this position, if we back up, there are only 2 pawn breaks possible for black. There's b5 and there's f5. And obviously, you can't push b5 because knight's just going to take on b5 and it's just going to be donating a pawn. So f5 is really the only logical pawn break to try to throw into position. Pawn takes f5, queen takes f5. Now we have knight to g5. And knight to g5 might look kind of weird because you're just kind of like, what is that doing? You're not threatening checkmate anywhere. You're underdeveloped as white. But there's a legitimate reason behind it because after bishop to g7, knight g comes to e4. You are trying to, place a little bit of pressure onto this d6 pawn. And this is just a nice setup for your knights to have because they're kind of defending each other. So that's kind of what you want when you have knights. Knight comes to f6, castles by white, castles by black, and then we see f4. This is kind of like taking advantage of the strange placement for the queen. Now, black is doing very well. Black, it has all of their pieces out. They are fully developed. Their rooks are connected. So they're like slightly ahead of white. But, the position is still fairly even. Pawn takes f4, bishop takes f4. And you definitely need to do something in this position because you do have a double attack on this pawn by the bishop and the knight. This queen is subject to a discovery. So we do have knight takes e4, pawn takes e4, and then the queen gets out of the way. So we have queen to g6. Also, it is laterally defending this pawn. So, you have just as many defenders as you do attackers. And then the knight comes to d5. Now, a pretty nice kind of like throw-in move that you could have actually done as white is queen to d5 with check. And this is going to force the king to step over, and then bishop comes back to g3. And what you're focusing on is the weakness of this point. Unfortunately, you don't really have a way because, I mean, black is going to play a6. You don't really have a good way to attack, you know, this pawn with the knight because you don't really have the ability to come in at e4. So that is unfortunate, but you know, you still can, you know, this is a backward pawn. So as you guys are familiar with like pawn structures, you know, backward pawns, you know, are weak pawns for whatever side has them. But we do see knight to d5. You know, of course, if, you know, black isn't careful, I mean, there is a fork possibly set up on this square. So you have to be nice and defensive. So bishop comes to g5. Queen comes to d3. We have knight to d4. And, you know, both white and black have both kind of done something that's annoying to the other player because they've, like, this knight is really, really nicely placed in black's position. And the same thing with the black knight. It's placed really, really nice in the white position. Bishop comes back to g3. Rook takes f1, rook takes f1. We see rook over to e8. Just placing a double attack on this pawn. And so we defend it with rook to e1. h5 comes. We're trying to see if we can knock this bishop, you know, off at some point. H3 comes just to give our bishop a little bit of space. Also, you know, at some point, giving the king somewhere to run if he needs to get some, you know, some air, some luft, as we say. King comes to H7, bishop down to F2 because this knight is, like, you just can't tolerate this knight in the middle of a position like this. So you're trying to see if you can get rid of it. The knight comes back to C6 because it wants to, you know, keep itself. The position is somewhat open, but it is fairly closed in the center of the board. So these knights are actually do really good in the position. So we have B3, just solidifying our structure on that side. Knight comes to E5, placing an attack on the queen. We got queen back down to E2, or queen down to E2. Bishop back to H6, king to H2. Knight comes back to C6, queen comes to F3. Knight comes to E5, queen comes to E2. And as you guys can see, we kind of have like a little bit of shifting around going on. You know, there's not like a major advantage for either side, so they're just kind of just shuffling their pieces a little bit. Rook comes to F8. We have bishop to G3. And this is attacking the knight again because we really kind of want to get rid of the knight. This would actually be a legitimate trade, trading the bishop for the knight. Knight comes back to C6. Rook comes to F1. Rook back to E8. Rook back to E1. We have knight down to D4. Queen to F2. B6. We have H4. We have rook takes e4. And like I said, I mean, this position is fairly equal. I mean, it's actually pretty dead drawn. All you really need to do is just kind of keep shifting your rook around, like up or down, you know, kind of back and forth. And I mean, there's really not a great way for each side to make progress. You do have this weakness as black, you know, but, you know, as long as the queen just maintains herself on this, you know, in this area, the pawn is not going to drop. This knight is just going to keep kind of shifting back and forth. You know, like I said, I mean, you know, there's not a lot of, you know, craziness going on for either side. But as Magnus Carlsen is known, he'll continue to push a position just over and over, just waiting for the opponent to crack. We do see rook takes rook takes e4, and we have actually reached a point in the game that if you do want to pause the video and see how Magnus Carlsen takes advantage of the unique placement of black's pieces, go ahead and do so. All right, cool. So it's not like a great advantage that white has, but they definitely do have the initiative in this position. And so if you found knight to e7, congratulations. You know, this square is defended through this rook, and you're also placing an attack on the queen. So you have a couple of different options. There's literally only 3 different options that you really have in the position. There is either moving the queen to 2 different squares, which the squares are queen to e6, or queen to g4. And there's actually taking the rook on, or the knight on e7 with the rook, which is actually what we saw in the game. And that was actually the worst of the 3 different options. It was much better to either just move queen over here to e6, just placing, you know, a double attack on this rook, and, you know, you would probably have trades and trades, you know, something like this. And then like a queen to f7. But as you can see, I mean, the position is good for white, but, you know, white is down a pawn. So, I mean, it's kind of a psychological thing. And then, you know, you pretty much would end up being in the same position after queen came to g4, just be trading, you know, in the exact same fashion. But After rook takes e7, rook is able to take e7. And yes, you are down a pawn as white, but you do have the exchange to speak of. So, you know, you're actually doing pretty well. So the game actually kind of starts going downhill a little bit from this point. So the knight comes to f5, you know, trying to attack the rook, but the rook just moves out of the way with rook to e2. Knight comes back down to d4, and then we have a rook down to e1. And you can see that things do start to unravel further. Queen comes to d3, and this actually just allows just a straight capture of the pawn. So you would actually be equal with pawns, and you'd be up the exchange. So this is just completely winning. But we do see bishop to f4 because white is in a situation where they do want to trade pieces down. As I always say, when you are up material, if you're up an exchange, if you're up a queen, if you're just up a straight piece, you know, trading down, like, you know, since the other person doesn't have the same amount of material, you're literally just going to trade down and you're just going to have some extra material. So, you know, it just really simplifies the game for you. So that's what Magnus Carlsen is trying to do here. So we have knight to f5, bishop takes f6, knight takes f6. We have queen up to f3. King, knight comes to g4 with check, but the king just steps up with king to g3. And it is actually in this position that Bacrot does resign the game. Now, basically what you're looking at with this particular situation is the main problem that you have is if you put the queen, so of course the queen's not going to come down here, but if you put the queen on, like, literally, well, you're not going to come to this square either. If you put the queen on any of these squares as like a retreat to try to hold, you know, like, the situation, I mean, you're going to be seeing queen to e4, and you're going to be forced to trade queens because you're going to be pinning. You're going to either be, you know, forking the queen to the king, or you're going to be pinning the queen to the king. So it's going to force the trade. And that's not something that black wants to do. The only other thing that would step away from an actual, like, immediate fork would be queen to d2. And then, you know, you might be thinking maybe I might be attacking this pawn. But after you see queen to f5 with check, king would come to h6 because going up is going to be mate. Rook comes to e6, and then knight comes to f6 only move. You're going to be looking at queen to f4 with check, and this is going to be forcing the trade. So there really is no way that you can get out of there being a trade of queens. And when you do trade queens, you're going to be in a position to where, you know, black has a knight against the rook, and that is just not equal. Not only are you worried about this pawn here, but you're also worried about the rook coming to the 7th and attacking both of these pawns. And there's just not a way to defend against that. And then, like I said before, you know, after king comes to g3, if you try to, like, let's say you back up here or something like that, you're just going to be looking at this. And there's not, you know, you can't throw anything in the way, so you're going to be forced to trade, you know, this way as well. Or, you know, just kind of move and just allowing the king to trade. But that's going to be losing there as well. So there just really isn't anything for black to do in this position. So, like I said, going back into the position that we had, you know, when the rook was here, you know, and we had, you know, these series of moves. Instead of this, I mean, you know, rook to e6 was possible. It was also possible just to, you know, just to kind of shift back and forth. And it pretty much would have just kept the game just the same. But, you know, the situation occurs sometimes where you get in a position where you're kind of going back and forth. And for some humans, it could just be kind of annoying to be doing that. So you kind of press and you try to find maybe something else to do, some other type of plan. But you end up just kind of hurting your position. So, and then he might be like me. I hate draws. Like, I literally don't like draws. If I'm getting demolished, and I mean, it's like, hey, man, I have the ability to save myself with a draw, cool. But if it's even, or if I feel like I have like a little bit of an advantage, I do not want to draw the game at all. So that was that game. Let me get back to the final position that we had. It was king up to g3. This is the final position that we saw. So I appreciate you guys very much. You know, for all my people in the Philippines, Maraming salamat, aking mga kaibigan. Hopefully everything's going good. I mean, I'm hearing it's a lot of rain and monsoon stuff going on right now. So, you know, stay dry. And anybody who is coming from Norway, tusen tak to you. Appreciate it very much. And for my people that are coming from France, merci beaucoup, mes amis. Mameya pour toi. You know, pour tous. I think that's how you say it. I'm pretty good in French. I'm not like that great, but you know, it is one of my better languages. But I appreciate you guys very much. And for my people in the Philippines, Makita Tayo Mamaya, and I'll see you guys next time.